Welcome to Femme Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portela, and today we are diving into the season finale of The Last of Us Season 2, titled Convergence, written by Craig Mazin, Neil Druckmann, and Halle Gross, and it is directed by Nina Lopez Corrado. But before we dive into today's episode, let me tell you how you can follow the pod. You can subscribe on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch every episode on YouTube or on Spotify. You can follow the pod on Instagram at FemmeFuriousPod. You can send me an email. If you have thoughts, feelings, opinions about this episode of television, if you, like me, ended the show and then immediately sent your group chat in stars, exhaling an existential dread, thinking about waiting 2 years for another season of TV, then you can email me. The email is femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com. And last but not least, you can join the Two Femme, Two Furious community. There is a 50% off discount for the first month right now if you use the code CHAOS at checkout. This was from my episode of Joyful Bookstagram with the Lost Books of Jess, who is amazing, and she has her own book club that is called the Chaos Cadre. So I am giving 50% off, and you can go listen to that episode. It was wonderful, and just a lovely little chat. The Two Femme, Two Furious community will give you Femme and Furious fully loaded bonus episodes, a 15% discount on merch and live events, Sunday Brunch, which is a monthly virtual hangout. You get the Suffragette Award, which is voting privileges on episode topics and more. And then you get Tea Time, which is our online chat, and then the Fast Five, which is a weekly content roundup. All right, let's have a chic peek at this week's episode of The Last of Us. Spoiler warning, if you have not seen the season finale, alert, alert, turn around now, okay? Here's your synopsis for this episode. In the aftermath of the showdown with Nora, Ellie tells Dina about Joel and the Fireflies. Jesse and Ellie set out into the storm to find Tommy, but when Ellie puts the pieces together of where Abby is, the two separate. Ellie finds Owen and Mel at the aquarium and proves that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Abby then shows up to the theater. She kills Jesse. She confronts Ellie. And as the show fades to black, we hear a gunshot, only for it to open back up on Seattle Day 1 from Abby's POV at the stadium, and leaving me in a state of existential dread. Okay, let's jump into this week's Femme Frame, where we dive into our key feminist theme, which I'm just going to keep very brief for this episode because there's a lot of other stuff to talk about. So when I was thinking about this episode of TV, the thing that I kept coming back to was autonomy, especially when a huge point of season 1 was the fact that this choice that Ellie would have made was taken away from her, and what that means and what it's done not just to her relationship with her and Joel, but to her as a person. This idea of autonomy is so poignant in this episode for our female characters, and I just wanted to draw some quick attention to it, okay? Dina refuses the alcohol with like a very firm no. Ellie makes the choice after holding this all in for so long to sort of unburden herself to Dina, and then later on makes a choice to pursue Abby, even though it's going to cause her to separate from Jesse. And then at the end, with the aquarium, we have this experience of Mel and Owen like having an argument about choice, essentially. Like, you have a choice, you can come with me. But then what Mel chooses to do after, which is to make the choice to like take the baby out, which is one of the most gruesome things on television, and I will be thinking about it for a long time. So there was just a lot on autonomy and like what was followed through with and what wasn't followed through with, and like what caused a fissure because of these autonomous choices that they are making, what created, connection over it. And that's a strong, I would say, like bridge or theme that sort of carried this episode of television that we'll really dive deeper into as we go through our slave by slave, which we will do right now. Okay, so there's no cold open for this episode of television. It just had a recap that I would say was really brutal. We see Abby killing Joel. We see Ellie with Nora. And, these flashbacks in between of these happy times with Joel. And so we're getting sort of this is what we're fighting for. This is what this is about. So there's no cold open, but sort of just like a really quick, rich, impactful, hey, remember everything that has happened that has led us to this point, to this pinnacle that we are about to experience. And then we have the credits, and this is the first time all season that Ellie has now been recentered. So in the episodes without Joel, she was sort of still in her position alone with like sort of an empty space next to her. So you could like really feel the weight of the empty space. And then after this last episode with Joel that we had in episode 6, it was the two of them together. And now that was sort of like our final, I guess, bid of adieu to Joel as a character. And now we see Ellie recentered as like her little mushroom self, recentered in the middle. There's no other us. There is just her, but it is her recentered and her alone. So I'm just going to kind of go through, these are my hot take hot notes, and I'm just going to go through the episode this way and we'll see what comes out. I'm sorry, I wish that I had more time to flesh this out. As you can see, I am still recording this in a hotel room. This is the last time that I will have to record any episodes in a hotel for hopefully a long while. I don't have as much time as I do with other episodes to like really pull all of my thoughts and ideas together. And I wish that I did, because there is so much about this episode of TV that I am sure I will want to come back to and revisit. And I really left this episode feeling quite excited for season 3. Also some concerns about some stuff, and we'll talk about that at the end. But let's just go through sort of my hot takes as we go through all of these. So my first note is Dina refusing the alcohol. You know, Ellie then goes and comes back from her showdown with Nora, and Jesse says, "What's your horse's name?" And she goes, "Shimmer." And I'm like, where is Shimmer? Okay, where is Shimmer? And we get confirmation on that later, but we don't know that at this moment. And I am very concerned that Ellie is not concerned about Shimmer, who has been left alone to her own devices in the music store. Okay? She goes, "I'm alone, open the fucking door." And we get this then, you know, she brushes right past Jesse. She has no interest in Jesse at this moment. She is only concerned about Dina. She knows that Dina was shot. You know, her sort of rage blackout has faded. She's come back to her senses. She's now just had to walk in the rain and to get back to where she is. So it was, you know, almost like a cold shower when somebody like dumps water on you to like bring you back to your senses. And then goes and has such a tender moment. Now, we've had like a break in the violence. So it's not like the last thing that we've seen is her going like, "Where is she?" and like beating Nora, because then we have this whole episode in between with Joel where we get some of those more tender beats. But if you think about where Dina and everybody is left off, and where Ellie has left off, is at this immense amount of violence, and really her first time outside of David displaying this type of violence. And with David, not to make excuses, because the show likes to say that we are excusing, you know, one sort of violence for another. And they talk about that a lot in this episode. But with David, her life was genuinely in danger. Her body was in danger. She's being threatened to be raped. She's being threatened to be made into a child bride. And once she pisses David off, she knows that he's going to kill her as well. So, and not only kill her, but then eat her. Ew. So, just throwing that one back to season 1 if we're thinking about that. And you know, this is the first time that with Nora she is displaying violence in the form of torturing somebody for information, something that we know Joel has done in the past, because this is a point of contention between Joel, Tommy, and Maria. And to see Ellie, you know, have this like moment where the lights go red and her eyes go black and she's just beaten the shit out of Nora, only to come back. It's something about that has soothed something in her, or has like taken the edge off of something in her. Something in her has cracked in this moment. And she's never been closer to Joel, by the way. But for her to come back and then sit with Dina and just so tenderly take her hand and be rubbing her hands, and, you know, it's so tender how she is with Dina, because she loves Dina. And I just thought it was such an interesting contrast, right? These moments of contrast that we get, like Joel plowing everybody down, right, in the hospital, and so gingerly holding Ellie in his hands as he carries her to the car, and so gingerly as he sets her down into the back seat, right? And the tender way that he talks to her is so calm, even though he's lying through his teeth to her, but it's so calm and so serene the way that he's talking to her at the end of season 1. Or same thing, like this violence that, you know, Ellie displays in season 1 when she kills David and James and comes out of that, like she's set this place on fire, right? And then she comes out of that, and the hug and the embrace that they have, and like his stroking of her hair and like calling her baby girl, like these moments of incredible tenderness after such incredible violence. And we know that this was an incredibly violent scene that she's just had. We witnessed it with Nora. For her to come back and have such a tender moment with Dina, to me, not only is continuing the theme, but really was just such an interesting dichotomy of humanity within somebody. And once again, incredible face acting through this episode, because as it cuts to Ellie's face, you can just see her eyes are completely dissociated. Her eyes are completely blank as she is recounting to Dina. She tells her the truth right away. I found Nora, I tortured her, and Dina goes good. And Ellie is reconciling something within herself in this moment with Dina, where she is essentially unburdening herself. And she goes, I thought it would be difficult, but it was so easy. And this is something that is incredibly poignant and connective with Joel, because one of the things that Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin, who are not just the writers of this episode, but Neil being one of the writers of the game, the writer of the game, right? And Craig, having worked on the show for 2 years and being credited with every episode, has his name on it for the writing in this season. So with that being said, when they're talking about season 1 and they're talking about Joel and they're talking about what happens at St. Mary's, I forget exactly who said it, but they both basically agree, where they said this is the easiest choice that Joel has ever made, is plowing down all of those people. Same thing. Ellie could not understand that. So just one episode ago on the porch, we see her say, you're selfish for this. And he goes, I'm maybe, but I love you, right? Like, I'm not selfish. I love you. And this is the thing that is motivating for both of them, because their community is each other. And we're going to talk about community and, again, the idea of us and what us is as a concept as we go through today. But what is so incredible about this moment here is that Ellie is recognizing something, whether she calls it out loud or not, that the easiest choice that Joel ever made, plowing down all of those people in the hospital to get her and to save her and to make sure that she is alive, torturing Nora was easier than she thought. And why is that? Because this is in retribution for Joel, the person that she loves and cares about the most in this world. And therefore, she is reconciling something in her relationship with him, even though he's not alive. You know, we can say that this show is about the cycles of violence, and it is. But one of the things that the game and the show is most interested in exploring is the idea of empathy and forgiveness. And so when we get this porch scene, quite literally, Ellie says, I don't know that I can forgive you for this. I'm going to get choked up. But she says, but I would like to try. And they don't get that opportunity. They're robbed of the opportunity to try, to figure it out, right? Because even the next day is, you know, we're going to go do our daddy-daughter shit, and they can't because he's already on patrol with Dina. And he didn't want to wake her after knowing that they've just had this reconciliation the night before. And I know I'm using the word reconcile a lot, but this experience that she is having through her own understanding of her violence and how easy it was when it is for the person that you love is giving her the opportunity to find the forgiveness for Joel for what he's done. She doesn't get the opportunity with him face to face. They will never be able to have that. She's robbed of that. But through her understanding of his motives and actions, through her own experience of the same feelings that he had as he was going through these motions of violence, is where they will find their healing, or is where she will find her forgiveness for him, you know, even posthumously. So I thought that was just like a really interesting scene. And I wrote in my notes, Ellie's empathy is her best quality, and reconciling this darkness within her is profound. She understands why it was so easy for Joel. That was literally my hot take, hot note. Because throughout the game, and even in season 1, it's not even just a game to show comp. Ellie is a character born of empathy. Both Joel and Ellie have a savior complex. But when it comes to Joel, that is very specifically for the people that he loves. And when it comes to Ellie, it is actually born of the idea that my purpose was to save everybody. So in season 1, she cannot save Riley, and the frustration that she experiences over that and the despondency that she has over that. She cannot save Tess. And even right away, the second that Tess shows Joel that she is bit on her neck, Joel holds his gun right up to her. And she kind of is like, okay, I get it. Let me help you get where you need to go. We don't have that much time. In that moment, Ellie is like, what are you doing? Like, we have to help her. And Joel knows there's nothing that we can do to help her. So then later on, knowing that she is immune, when she then brushes up against Henry and Sam gets bit, and she tries to cut her hand and smear her blood. Like, that's obviously not how science works, but she's hoping to save this person. And then watching as, Henry shoots Sam, and both of them going, no, 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 as Henry then turns the gun on himself and commits suicide. And what that does to her, and this idea of like, my purpose is to save people, that if I can just die for this cause, if I can just go and get this thing done with the Fireflies, like, Tess doesn't need to die, Riley doesn't need to die, Sam doesn't need to die, then Henry doesn't need to die because he's not, having to live with the weight or the grief of killing his brother. And only for that story to continue on and on and on, right? And then we get this story with Eugene last episode where she's using the Firefly tactics. Hold your hand out, count to 10. Slowly, right? He has time. Let him see his fucking wife. And this is born of this empathy that we see over and over again. Like, even when they are passing the Seraphite, she's like, they've killed children, and how fucked up that is. And like, these people are not good people. That's like further justifying why she feels she needs to be killing, right, Abby and her crew. And same thing, this Seraphite is dragged in, and she's watching it with Jesse behind these crates, and she's like, I can't stomach this, and what that means and what type of person she is. And as she goes in even later and she's got the gun on Owen and Abby, she's like, I'm not like you. And genuinely, internally, she means that. I don't know what it would have come to if Owen doesn't pick up that gun, but I do know that Ellie is quite moved by the fact that she has killed these people, and it's born of her empathy. She does not feel good about these things. Ellie is a character who is connected to her empathy. And in the loss of Joel, she is adrift, and this is a part of her that is fighting to like claw its way out and find purchase in the real world and not be suffocated under all of her grief and rage of what has happened, not just to her, but to the world, and then very specifically to Joel. And it all kind of just comes out in this rage baiting that is happening between these two groups of people. So Ellie's empathy is something that is to note, because is it the antidote to her rage, and is it Ellie's empathy that is perhaps the thing that could be the solve to these cycles of violence? Now, if we go back a couple of episodes, we have this conversation that Dina and Ellie have together where Dina is explaining her backstory and the first person that she ever killed. And she says, well, if I didn't get the opportunity to kill this person, I would have gone to the ends of the earth and I would have searched for this person forever. And we're seeing in that moment that Dina is trying to create a bridge with Ellie to say that I understand this. I understand that the people that I loved and cared about the most in this world were taken away from me, and I had an opportunity to avenge them like in that moment. But I'm understanding that you didn't, and I understand why you need to do this, and I would have searched for him forever. And of course, she doesn't know if that's true or not, because she didn't have to live in that reality. Ellie is living in it right now. And now that Dina knows the truth, does she actually feel that this mission that Ellie needs to go on to avenge Joel's death is justified? And so this empathy or this understanding or this creating of the us that she had last episode, or the last episode that we got to see the two of them together having this conversation in episode 5. Well, now she knows what Joel did. And she knows that Ellie knew. Listen, Ellie only really found out, like technically found out. She knew, but she didn't have the confirmation that she has with Joel where she has the porch scene. And that's only the night before that Joel is killed. So it's like less than 24 hours between point A and point B. So she doesn't technically know who these people are and what they've done. She can figure it out. She understands it maybe in the thereafter. But Dina essentially getting this information, you can see it. She turns her back on Ellie in that moment. The good that she said with Nora, about torturing Nora just moments ago, is sort of snuffed out. And this changes her opinions about things because immediately she's like, we need to go home. We need to go home. And instead of, where a few episodes ago she was like, we will see this thing through. Now she's like, I don't know how I feel about that, buddy. And is changing her mind. And even within the episode, there is still this bridging of the gap because she gives Ellie the bracelet. And she said the bracelet is good luck. Which I would say Ellie encounters a shit ton of bad luck, and she says it over the episode. She's like, well, it hasn't provided you with much luck, and Dina's like, well, I'm alive. And it's like, well, if that's the best luck that we could achieve in this world, that's sad, but I guess, okay, at the end of the episode we don't even know if Ellie is alive or not, right? So just having Dina change her mind after so insistently saying to Ellie that she understands is, either is profound, because Ellie is laying herself bare. Ellie is putting all the cards on the table. Ellie is saying, if you want to love me, this is what you're falling in love with. This is who I am internally. And this is what I am confronting about myself and about the world and about Joel. And what does it mean that I love him so much that even knowing this, I have still chosen to put us all in the situation? And what that means for their relationship moving forward, I think is going to be really interesting to track and watch. I also was wondering if the bracelet is going to end up becoming sort of like the watch was for Joel, this sort of reminder of what it is that we're fighting for, the person that we're fighting for, the community that is there for her on the outskirts of her community with Joel, and, being able to sort of like broaden out the horizon and experience what it is to have something else to root into. This watch to Joel was a reminder to do better with Sarah and his connection to Sarah, to be a better father than his father was. What we see with this bracelet is perhaps Ellie's reminder that there are other people in this world who love and care about her as we move forward, depending on where the season has ended, because we don't really know. We don't know what happened with that gunshot at the end. So we will see, I think, that bracelet come back into play. I would be shocked if it didn't. Okay, so Jesse and Ellie are going out to look for Tommy. They're going to get their party together. They're going to go home to Jackson. And as Jesse and Ellie are like going out on this conquest, Ellie is like, well, where were you guys? And how did you find us? And all of this stuff. And he goes, we are rendezvousing at the bookstore. Like, that's our meetup spot. And a rendezvous at the bookstore is, in fact, my entire life. That is the only thing I ever want to do, is just rendezvous at every bookstore that there ever was. Okay? We get confirmation in this conversation that Shimmer is okay. And this makes me happy because despite the fact that there are many, many, many gruesome things that we will see and have seen on this TV show, Shimmer dying is not one of them. And that makes me thrilled, okay? Shimmer is confirmed to be okay. And that just means that for the next 2 years, we can breathe a little bit easier because we know that Shimmer, who now has a degree in music, totally fine. And for that, I am grateful. Jesse figures out and confronts Ellie about Dina being pregnant, and they end up having this conversation. Now, Jesse has a lot more depth in the show than he does in the game. Like, I would say Jesse in the game is much more of like your ride or die bitch. He just pulls up in a fight and he's like, get in! He saves Ellie, and it's a little bit different. Like, he saves her in the show, but there's layers of resentment with that and layers of years of their friendship in a way that tugs at their flaws, and they'll talk about these things over the course of this episode. But like in the show, in the game, he's like your ride or die bitch. Like he does not have this layer of resentment. He does not have this layer of confliction. And in fact, like when he confronts Ellie about Dina being pregnant in the game, this whole conversation like goes quite different. And so I like that he has a little bit more depth, and there's more humanity to it. So I love that he has this line, like, everything changing doesn't have to change things. And he sort of throws that back at her. He's like, of course everything changing changes things, you know? This is everything changing. And this responsibility, this moral responsibility that he feels, where he's like, I'm getting Dina, I'm getting my fucking kid, and I'm getting the hell out of here, because this fight that is going on between these two groups of people, again, a turf war that is happening in Seattle, a large city, doesn't need to be our fight. We don't need to be fighting in this. I understand what you came to do. I hope that you did enough for you to feel good about it. But everything changing does change things. And this sort of like fraying at the seams of the community that Ellie does have and what that will mean as we move forward in the story. When he said, my kid, I see Ellie's face. If you go back and watch the face that Ellie makes, because it's like, oops, it's Ellie's. You know, it's obviously quite literally Jesse's, but Dina and Ellie have already sort of moved forward in the story of their love journey together to decide that they're raising this kid together. I'm going to be a dad, right? And what that means to like throw Jesse into the mix, you know, and that Dina has elected to tell Ellie this thing because Ellie is the person that she wants to raise this baby with, instead of telling Jesse. Even in the opportunity that she had the night before, she could have said, I'm pregnant, and they could have had that conversation afterwards, but she could have disclosed the information, and instead she just refuses the flask and says, I can't. And he has to put the pieces together. Now, in the video game, Dina just has like a relentless morning sickness, and Jesse puts the pieces together to be like, she's pregnant, right? And that looks a little bit different here in how like it needs to come out and the information needs to emerge, but still he puts the pieces together, and Ellie's like, you know, shit, you didn't really know. I just sort of like told her secret to you, you know, I'm sure she was going to tell you and stuff like that. But how that ends up creating an us within the community, you know, that is now Dina and Ellie and the baby. And Jesse is trying to like rope himself into us. He's like, I'm getting us and my kid out of here. Like his whole us is everybody involved. And Ellie and Dina have already sort of said like, we've solidified the us to me and her and the baby. So just interesting, and community, and like who is the us in The Last of Us. Like the show is interested in looking at that. And so I just found that whole conversation between the two of them interesting. Then we get the picture of the prophet. Now this is what I remembered too, okay? Because I remembered thinking the prophet was a Black woman. And then last episode, when we saw the graffiti, you know, or maybe it was the episode before, where it says, feel her love. Yeah, it had to have been the episode before. Feel her love and then feel this bitch, right? With the seraphites underneath. That was not the same woman, I don't think. And then I was confused because I was like, I remember this being a Black woman. And then she goes, is there more than one prophet? Just the fact that they had that line, and it wasn't necessarily a throwaway line, but it wasn't something that was obviously a deep dive into like the lore of the prophet and the seraphites. So I am interested to see what they will do with that next season, because this idea of like, is there more than one prophet? And if so, why? And what does that mean? And what that will mean for sort of like what has evolved in the history of the scars is fascinating to me. So, okay, at this point in the conversation, as they are moving past this picture of the prophet, Jesse says again, I'm not dying. This is count number 2 for Jesse, which basically was like a big neon sign that says, I am dying in this episode. Saying it once is one thing. Saying it twice is like third time's a charm, because he doesn't get to say it a third time. He just dies. So then we get this scene where they are watching the wolves essentially attack and dehumanize and completely berate this Seraphite kid. And Ellie goes, he's a fucking kid. And what that means for them. Now, Jesse's not wrong. There's 6 of them, like 7 if you're including the Seraphites. Like, these people are incredibly violent. And he says it. He's like, they're lynching each other. They are disemboweling each other. Like, they're violent. They're shooting each other down. Like, this is a war. We're in a war zone right now, and we're here because of you. And like, we, two people against all 6 of these people, like, we don't stand a chance. And this is so different than how it is in the video game, because in the video game, you're literally just killing people left and right, you know? And that's the nature of a video game. So obviously these are just different mediums with like different things that are going on, but to witness it is to just reaffirm what Ellie's moral code is, which is children should not die in this world. Children should be protected. They shouldn't be killing these kids, and this is the second Seraphite kid that she is seeing killed or tortured because of the WLF. So she has this moral code, and it reminds you of Kathleen when she's talking to Henry, and she's like, kids die, they die all the time. And how stark of a statement that is that she's made in season 1, and now in season 2, it's like, well, they do die all the time. They're dying of this infection. They're at risk now in like Seattle specifically. They're dying because we're living in a world of incredible violence in, you know, this post-apocalyptic mushroom zombie world. And what that means as we look out into the world around us. This is her moral code. She is okay with violence in the capacity of it looks like this but not that. Right? And so the violence that she's not okay with is killing, torturing, hurting kids. And in the after episode, part of what they discuss is like, well, Ellie sees herself as that kid. Ellie sees herself as the kid that was sort of in the same position, and, you know, that she was saved and found and cared for by Joel. So then we get this conversation between Isaac and Parker, and she says, the storm is a convergence zone, meaning the bad weather is a problem. You know, what that looks like and what it means, and this conversation that they have, but also, you know, that the storm that is coming, it very much was giving like winter is coming. Winter is coming. Winter was coming from season 1 of Game of Thrones. And we waited all those seasons for winter to fucking come. And that's what it felt like, as she said, like, the storm is the convergence zone, and this episode title being Convergence. Like, sometimes the writers of The Last of Us are really on the nose with how they're putting things out there, because the physical storm that is brewing outside, a metaphor for the storm that is brewing internally between Abby and Ellie as the episode goes on. And so this convergence zone, things meeting and creating bad weather, right? For the end of the episode, for 2 turbulent storms of people, Abby and Ellie, to converge in their showdown. And what that means, you know, so this was just a little on the nose, but I wrote the line down because I was like, yeah, the storm is a convergence zone, which is like, I don't know if people really say that in real life, but they're saying it here. What that means and how it more specifically applies to the metaphor of Abby and Ellie. And then we get that Abby and Mel and Owen are missing in this conversation. And of course, she's like, well, tonight of all nights that they're missing. And what that means, and then you're like, okay, well, what is happening tonight? What is tonight? What is tonight of all nights? What is tonight? And he goes, okay, well, it doesn't matter that those people are missing. It matters that Abby is missing. There's only one Abby. And Parker's like, what, are you in love with her? And she's like, you're not the first old man. And he like kind of cuts her off, and he's like, sit down and shut up. And I really love this because, of course, as a woman and looking at a young, beautiful woman like Abby in the show, of course, we're like, well, what, are you in love with her? Because us as women have been conditioned to look at older men as looking at younger women as commodities and things to be sexualized and things to like fantasize over. And so, of course, she is like, well, is that what's going on here? Like, what's your deal with Abby? And basically he goes, listen, Abby has what it takes to take up the mantle, which is what her role is. If I die or if you die, because there's a great possibility that we will, with whatever is happening tonight, which we will find out a little bit later, she's the one who gets to run this entire thing. At this point, we don't know how big this operation is. But by the end of the episode, when it goes to Abby's POV from Seattle day one, and we're in the stadium and we are overlooking just how fucking huge the WLF is. Okay, well, you could see why they need a leader, and you could see why they need one who is strong and convicted. And so for a long while, Abby belonged to this collective and clearly had a relationship with Isaac in the years since she's met him that has allowed them to forge the type of relationship that shows that she is the type of person to take over this thing. And we've just watched Isaac, a few episodes ago, take a hot pan off the flame while monologuing and basically torture one of these Seraphites with it. So we know that the type of person that it takes to run this organization is somebody who needs to be filled with vitriol, with somebody who needs to be convicted in this type of violence and capable of demonstrating it. So it's interesting because we already know that Abby is connected to Owen and connected to Mel and connected to Nora, and these are her people, these are her friends, these are her community, and how that has maybe shifted and changed over the years. And we'll see obviously in season 3 what that looks like and where they've ended up. But the fact that they are all missing is also saying something to Isaac, which is maybe her loyalties are not here. And Parker kind of says it a little bit more directly. So just something to keep in mind, because this is setting us up for some themes that will be emerging from Abby's side of the story next season. Then Jesse has this line, "Here we are again, you and me in bad fucking weather." Yeah, well, the last time they were in bad fucking weather, Joel died. Okay, and that's what set this whole thing off. So basically, season starting with a bad storm, season ending with a bad storm. And my hot girl hot take note here was like, yeah, it's not giving good vibes. It's giving ominous AF, because it is. And then she picks up in the bookstore the Grover book, which is The Monster at the End of This Book. And first of all, Jesse goes, "Good one." And I want to be like, how do you know? Because even if Jackson has a library, I guess this is a pretty popular book, children's book, but I don't know. He was just like, "You picked up a good one." And I'm like, how do you know? Did you read The Monster at the End of the Book? I've read The Monster at the End of the Book, and I'm sure you who are listening have read, perhaps, The Monster at the End of this book. But in the Mushroom Apocalypse, do we really have a lot of opportunities to read Grover's book from Sesame Street? And do the children of this world and the teenagers of this world, like Ellie and Jesse, know who Grover is? To which I will say Grover is very important to my family in particular. My mother has a stuffed animal of Grover that she sleeps with. So when I think about Grover, I also have this very childlike experience. So watching her pick up the monster at the end of the book where Jesse is like, "That's a good one." And I'm like, it really is, because for me, it's so specific and unique to my own childhood and how I perceive my own mother. And then thinking about this as Ellie as a mother and what it will be like to raise their child. And then we have this conversation in the bookstore, and we have this conversation about love. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is there is this mural of Alice in Wonderland. The mural has sort of an Alice in Wonderland vibe, because there's a clock, there is a girl in sort of a blue dress holding a book, and then there is a bunny. And I don't know if it's supposed to be an Alice in Wonderland comp or not, but the clock is what made me think it. And not only that, but then there are these big mushrooms, which also sort of remind me of Alice in Wonderland, but also, this idea of we're in the mushroom apocalypse, and now there are these big sort of woodland, I don't know, I am not a mushroom expert, okay? So if you are a mushroom expert and you know what type of mushrooms these are, these little red with the spots on them mushrooms that you find out in the woodland spaces, or in the, Alice in Wonderland vibes, you can send me an email at femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com, okay? I don't know what the name of these mushrooms are, but they are these big, huge mushrooms, blooming. They're built for the bookstore. And then, of course, you get nature in the mushroom apocalypse, taking over. So you have these, vines of ivy sort of spilling down over them. But Jesse just sort of framed in these big mushrooms, and then this mural behind him, and the words on it is, "Everything's got a moral if only you can find it." And what that means for our story as sort of a tagline or a subconscious thought that is plugged there for us to be thinking about. So I really liked this as we are having this conversation between Jesse and Ellie, where he says, I was in love with this girl, like this feeling of falling in love. And she had these paintings that she was selling. And Ellie was like, were they any good? And he was like, no, but I bought 4. And she asked me to go with her and I couldn't. I felt obligated to this community and what that means and what he was willing to sacrifice and sort of like the idea of obligation. To which I will say, I've said it before and I've said it again, like sex in the mushroom apocalypse, like he should have been chasing that to the end of the earth. If you're getting the opportunity to go and do those things, I'm sorry, but I don't know, go and live your life to the best of your ability. And instead, he basically kind of says like, I've settled for Dina. He doesn't say that. He's like, I love her and I care about her, but I don't love her like you do. I loved that girl like you love Dina. And so I'm okay to take a back seat to this, even though he's like, we've got a lot of other problems going on, but like, let's clear the air about this. I'm not making a claim over Dina. We'll figure this piece out together. And obviously, again, this isn't the language that he's using, but the fact that they have this conversation where he's like, we've got a ton of other problems right now, but the problem that we don't need to have is you walking on eggshells feeling like we're both going to be fighting over Dina. We're not going to be fighting over Dina. I don't love Dina the way that you love Dina. And so, like, let's just put this all out on the table and let's, clear the air, like, bro to bro, that's not what's going to be happening here because my heart is in Ohio, which is a song, okay? But, anyway, that's not the name of the song. The song is Ohio is for Lovers, but the lyrics are because my heart is in Ohio. Okay, that's not where she went. I forget where they said that this girl was traveling to, but anyway, she has traveled onward. They traded for a bunch of stuff. They had some good stuff to trade, Ellie says. And then they moved on. And, so wherever she is, that's where his heart really is and belongs to her at that moment in time. And I literally wrote in my notes, bro time with Mr. Wyoming, okay? And then they have this conversation like, well, why wouldn't you go? And he goes, because I was taught to put other people first. And everything's got a moral if only you can find it, right? This idea of what it is to be obligated to community and what it is to be obligated to the people that you care about and who your community is and what that means for Jesse and sort of what he's put on his shoulders. And so I love that they take like sort of this Mr. Wyoming, which is what Dina calls him earlier in the season, for Ellie to then sort of comp that out and say Saint Jesse of Wyoming and everyone else is a fucking asshole, because she recognizes that there is hypocrisy in this even at this point, and yet she can still take it in and digest that there is something here about people putting other people first and what that means and how to look at that and what that feels like. And what he doesn't recognize is that Ellie was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to put everybody in the world first. She was willing to die to make a cure. She was actually so angry over Joel. The argument that they have, even the episode before on the porch, where she says, I was supposed to have died. My life would have fucking mattered. And what Jesse doesn't understand as he's looking at her and he's thinking she's impulsive and she doesn't know how to put other people first and everything that she does is for her, is that he's meeting her at a space and time from the time that they moved to Jackson onward is only her time after the Fireflies and what it has been to have this lifeline and this idea of having a greater purpose. You have a greater purpose than any of us could have ever imagined. Having that lifeline pulled out of her. And so everything that he sees thereafter is this sort of petulant dealing with the aftermath of that, of what it is to have your purpose of saving the entire world. And he doesn't realize that for Ellie, she was willing to do that. For Ellie, she was actually felt that she was supposed to do that, that was her purpose. And so he basically continues to call her selfish over the course of this episode. And I understand why he perceives it that way. But what he doesn't realize is what she was willing to give up. She was willing to give up her life for this and now doesn't get the opportunity. And so the only other thing that she had to cling to was Joel. And that one thing has been taken away. And now what does she have left? And what that means for her. So as this conversation ends and they discover where Tommy is and they start to make their moves, okay, there is this giraffe stuffed animal that like it doesn't pan in on, but it sort of like zooms over as they're leaving. And again, to come back to the giraffes in this very, very happy moment, this moment of reprieve, this moment of childlike wonder that Joel and Ellie have just before they enter the fireflies. And again, this sort of like things were good. There was something to fight for, this moment of hope. And again, pulling us back into this idea of the fireflies and what that last episode of television in season 1 was providing for us, which is like Ellie was willing to die. Ellie was supposed to die. Ellie wanted to die to create the cure and to save all of these people. And her savior complex reaches so far beyond just Joel and into the entirety of humanity. And Jesse will come to say this later, but just what that means and what this means for them, as he then tells her that he voted no in Jackson because it wasn't in the best interest of the community, and the absolute betrayal and hurt that Ellie feels in her heart of hearts that this person that she loves and cares about has voted against her wishes. And he goes, well, it wasn't what was right for the community. And she goes, let me tell you something about your moral compass. You think you're a good person? Guess what? You just let a kid die because he wasn't in your community. And the show is interested in exploring who is the us in The Last of Us. And so for Jesse, his larger overarching us is the entire community of Jackson. And responsibility that comes with that is part of the fabric of who he is. And Ellie goes, well, let me tell you about my us. I watched the only other person in the smallest community that ever existed, a community of 2. I watched the only other person in my community be tortured and killed while they held me down and forced me to watch. And pointing out that this idea of having different groups of community that are considered the us in The Last of Us is exactly why these cycles of violence are happening, and that we are able to essentially justify our own moral and ethical compass based off of who we are discerning is within the community. And so she's pointing this out to him. She recognizes the hypocrisy. She recognizes it within herself, okay? And she recognizes it within the larger context of who Jesse is and what he is trying to say here, that because he's thinking about the greater good of the community of Jackson, that he has some sort of moral superiority, and that gives him the right to say what is or is not correct in a moment, when meanwhile he's just let somebody die. And that means that he's also a bad person because his moral compass has allowed somebody else to pay the price of what he wasn't willing to because he's looking at his own community. And so this idea of what we are able to explain ourselves out of when we are taking our ethical and moral compass and basically saying, well, that's it. You know, if that's what I'm doing here, then that's what we're doing here. And that doesn't make you a better person. It just makes you one with a different moral compass than mine. So I really loved this conversation, and I really love that it sort of ends with them separating and going their own ways. And you know, they're there to go after Tommy. And as soon as Ellie clicks into place that this is where Abby is, like, it is tunnel vision. She's like, I can't think of anything else. And she's like, Tommy's fine. And he's like, they just called for backup. And she's like, he'll still be fine. Then he'll take out all of those other people. And Jesse is like, hello, like, what is wrong with you? Like, Tommy is a part of our community. And again, Ellie can't get past it. And so I had a girlfriend, and she texted me and she was like, you know, Joel wouldn't have wanted Ellie to go out in search of Abby when Tommy was in danger. And she is correct. Because when we get this conversation on the porch scene, right, where he says, should you have your own, I hope you do a little bit better than me. She's failing at that right now. She's not doing better than him. She's doing worse. And this is what Bella Ramsey says in the after episode. She's like, she's doing worse than what Joel has wished for her or has put on her as she is taking up the mantle of Joel. And what that actually means as we move through the story, because this is her hero's journey, if she's a hero at all, right? This is her arc. This is her space of redemption. This is her, you know, opportunity to sink low to potentially have a rise up high. And we don't know because we don't know how the season ends, because we end with the gunshot and the fade to black, right? So, you know, is she ending on a low where she has just done worse than Joel and that's how her life ends? Or is she going to be able to come back from that? We don't know. We'll find out next season. We see all of the boats, okay, and we know that now the WLF is sailing or going out into the weather somewhere to go do something, and we end up figuring out that they land on Scar Island. We don't know that until later, but something that I found really funny, I put a hot girl hot take note. I was like, Ellie not knowing how to do an escalator in season 1 with Riley, but knowing how to drive a boat is fucking priceless to me. It's the first time that maybe she's had to like use a boat or get on a boat with like her travels with Joel perhaps, but just Ellie knowing how to do that was really funny to me. Then we see this kid. She also sort of gets tipped into the water. She comes aboard on shore. She is on what is called Scar Island. There's a young boy there, and you know, the irony that is just a few scenes ago, she wanted to save one of the children that belonged to this group, and now this group is trying to hang her. And so just watching Ellie in this moment starting to get hung up was absolutely terrifying to me. I was sweating through my clothes. And then to see that, okay, now we get to see what Isaac was talking about, which is like, tonight's the night. Well, what is tonight? They are blowing up a bunch of stuff in the village in Scar Island and what that will actually mean. So, okay, setting us up for some stuff in season 3. Then Ellie then gets free of the noose. She makes her way to the aquarium where she thinks that Abby is. She is sort of making her way through the aquarium. We see a bunch of medical supplies and like a bunch of like bloody gauze and things like that. And so what is that about? And it's all fresh. So she knows that there's people here. And finding then Mel and Owen and using the map technique that Joel taught her. You're going to point to the map over here and you're going to point to the map over there, and it better be the same spot or like you guys are going to die. And Owen kind of turning around and saying to Mel, well, it doesn't really matter because she's going to kill us both anyway. She says, I'm not like you. No, I'm not. I'm not like you. And we don't get to know whether or not that's true because ultimately Owen ends up picking the gun and making a play at shooting Ellie and just in a defense mechanism shoots him back. This is so gruesome. The bullet goes through his neck, kills him, through his body, so through his neck, so there's an exit wound at the back of his neck, and goes and skims past Mel and like essentially skims her artery and shoots into the back of the cabinet. And so this isn't a clean shot, right? Like Ellie sort of shoots because it's a shooter get shot situation in this scenario, and only to discover that Mel is pregnant. This is true in the game, and there is a lot of despondency that we are experiencing at this point because you are playing from Ellie's POV, and there is such a weight to her grief and her contention of self and her understanding of who she is in this moment. And ultimately, this scene is so much more gruesome in the show because as Mel is dying, she goes, cut the baby out. You can do it. And she starts to walk her through it. And this is so gruesome, and Ellie can't. She doesn't know, and now Mel is dying, this one person who can tell her how to do it, and just how awful it looks. And it looks bad as Jesse and Tommy walk in. It looks bad surely later when Abby walks in, and it feels bad for Ellie. You can see on her face and in her response to this, like she didn't want to hurt a pregnant woman. This is against her moral code. She doesn't want to hurt children. She doesn't want to hurt children at all. And so she is going against her moral code. Obviously it's unintentional here, but this is just a look how far you have fallen from who you are at your core, which is generally a character who displays empathy and cares about other people. And what that will mean again for her journey potentially moving forward, and what it means for her journey just even through the rest of this episode. This moment of Mel asking her to cut out the baby, this is something that I will be thinking about as far as like moments on TV that stand out with you for the rest of your life. I will be thinking about this. This was really just very gruesome. There's a lot of stuff in the show that happens that is very gruesome. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the show that is like conventionally horror scary. And this was the first time ever watching this show in all a bajillion episodes that we have. I'm just kidding. It's probably like 17 episodes that we've had of the TV show so far. Is the first time that I took my blanket and folded it over my eyes, because I really did think for a moment that Ellie was going to cut in and try to get the baby out and what that was going to look like. And I just was despondent over the scene. So, of course, Tommy comes into the rescue, and then later we get this conversation with Tommy and Jesse in the theater, and Tommy basically explaining it away, like, those people, like, okay, they died, and I get that you feel bad about it, but they were also a part of what happened to Joel. And so, like, again, like, Tommy drawing the excuses out of when violence is and is not okay. And for Ellie, this was not okay. This is against her moral code, and this is saying something to her about herself and who she is. And then, you know, she's like, so what? Abby just gets to live? And Tommy says, yes. Are you able to make your peace with that? And we won't know until later whether she is or she isn't, right? We won't know what her answer to that is really until the series is concluded. And then Tommy is very astute. He sees that Ellie and Jesse need to have like a conversation. There kind of is some tension brewing between them. And so he leaves, and we get this conversation between Jesse and Ellie where he goes, okay, maybe I see that we're different, but here's where I know that we're the same. I came back because I love and care about you, and you're my friend, and I would do anything for you. Doesn't say that, but that's what he's saying. And he goes, and I know that you would set the world on fire to save me if I was in trouble. And Ellie goes, I would. And she's being genuine here. She would do that. She would try her hardest to get any of her friends or the people that she cares about out of danger. She literally cut her hand open in season 1 and tried to smear her blood on Sam. And I say that a lot because I think it is such an honorable display of her empathy and the type of person that she is. She cares about people and she wants them to live, and she wants to be somebody that can save them. Her savior complex is comparable to Joel here. And then we hear, you know, shots being fired, and they start to run. And just like in the game, Jesse gets shot and killed immediately as soon as the door opens. Abby kills him. Ellie tosses her weapon, and then she comes out. And one of the things that I think is important to note here is you can see a noose mark around Abby's neck. And that's important because we just watched Ellie almost get hung by these people. Okay? So it is important to realize that there is a noose mark around her neck. So where has she been in these past 3 days, and what has happened to her in the past 3 days that has led her to here? Having this conversation that is basically word for word from the game. You know, Joel killed your father because I could have made the cure, and like, it's me, I'm the one that you're looking for, you know, and then this like, no, as they're having this final confrontation, and then it fades to black. We hear the gunshot, and then the crane sort of pans over, like it's like a big pan over to the stadium and into this next POV, and we get the POV shift. And it ends with Abby overlooking the stadium, and it says Seattle Day 1. Now, for those of you who are confused about this or who are looking at this in the game, you play about half from Ellie's POV, and then you play about half the game from Abby's POV. And so they're giving us that shift in this moment and what that will mean, and how we sort of get to that point from Abby's POV and what that will mean for this final showdown and seeing what actually happens. This would have been, I think, a better, perhaps, like a mid-season finale if we still had those, but we don't. And I am hoping that they don't extend into 4 seasons, because to me, looking at the game perspective, without giving any spoilers here, seems like there is still just a lot of story to tell for the rest of season 2. And they've already, for the rest of game 2, and Neil Druckmann has already said that they are not extending past the game where it ends. So I'm interested in what the next, you know, season will look like. And if they decide to break it up into more than one season, I hope that they release them fast, because to spend another 4 years in this story feels really long for the type of story that they're telling. So I hope that they kind of conclude in season 3. And if not, I hope that it's sort of like like how Squid Games is like doing it, or how Netflix like drops their seasons, which is like, 5 episodes and then 5 episodes, maybe it would be 10 episodes and 10 episodes. But it seems like there's still a lot of story left to tell if I'm going based off of the game, and then it feels like there is a potential for a season 4, just based off of some of the stuff they've hinted at and like started to set up. It just seems like there's a lot more they want to explore and not enough time. I don't know. So we'll see. Anyway, let's get into our burn book. Let's crack it open and look at the superlatives for this week. The Bold and Bothered Award. We let you live and you wasted it. From Abby. Phenomenal performance from Caitlin Dever. And absolutely love that. The Shiro Award is when Dina gives Ellie the bracelet. I just love that moment. I thought it was really cute, and it was like the little evil eye keeping her safe and protected, and good luck. The Femme Fatale Award. You let a kid die because he wasn't in your community. Ellie saying that was the most like, fuck you. Let's dismantle the patriarchy right here, right now, brick by brick. You're not a good person, Jesse. You let a kid die today because he wasn't in your community. Speak your truth trophy. Saint Jesse of Wyoming was the best line of this episode. It was funny, it was quippy, and I love that the mantle of Mr. Wyoming is elevated to Saint Jesse just ahead of his death, okay? A nice way to memorialize him before he goes. And then the honorary heartthrob is Jesse telling the story about buying the 4 paintings. I literally wrote in my notes, babe. Like, that is giving meet cute. It is giving rom-com. It is giving where's the fanfics. I'm here for it. So that is our episode this week. Thank you so much for tuning in to Femme Furious. If you like this episode, share it out on social media. Leave a review. Tag me on Instagram, all that fun stuff. I will be back on Thursday doing a breakdown of The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. It's a really fascinating episode that I'm excited to get into. And then starting next week to replace The Last of Us as our series, although it seems inconceivable that this part of this journey is over because this is where Femme Furious was born, was in The Last of Us. With that being said, next thing that Femme Furious will be looking at as far as the series throughout June will be all of Emily Henry's books. That is Beach Read starting the first week in June, next Monday. That will then go into The People We Meet on Vacation, Book Lovers, Happy Place, and then Funny Story. And then starting in July, we'll be doing Twilight, okay? So the movie's not the book. And so if you're looking to get caught up, or you're looking to get ahead, or you want to just see like what we're talking about, we will be talking about those things coming up over the summer for Femme Furious. And until then, everything's got a moral if only you can find it. Bye for now.